Picture this: a beautiful summer wedding in a small Michigan town. 200 guests watching as a groom lifts his hand and strikes his bride across the face in front of everyone. The room erupts in chaos, screams, gasps. The bride collapses to her knees, sobbing. But here's what nobody expected, what the bride herself didn't see coming until it was too late. That slap wasn't about anger. It wasn't about cruelty. What happened next would expose a secret so devastating, so unimaginable, that it would tear apart not just a marriage, but an entire community's sense of safety forever. This is the story of Marcus Bennett and Claire Hudson, two people who seemed destined for happiness, whose wedding day became the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. On June 14th, 2023, their ceremony at Riverside Gardens in Grand Haven, Michigan, was supposed to be the celebration of a lifetime. Friends and family traveled from across the country. The venue was decorated with white roses and fairy lights. Claire wore her grandmother's lace veil. Marcus had tears in his eyes during his vows. Everything seemed perfect. But in less than 60 seconds, perfection shattered into something no one could have prepared for. To understand what happened that day, we need to go back. We need to understand who these people were, how they met, and the invisible thread of terror that was slowly wrapping itself around their lives without either of them fully realizing it until it was far too late. Marcus Bennett met Claire Hudson at a community fundraiser in Grand Haven, Michigan, in the fall of 2020. It was one of those crisp October evenings where the air smells like fallen leaves and promise. Marcus was volunteering at a local food bank drive, and Claire had just moved to town after finishing her nursing degree. She was sorting through donated canned goods when Marcus accidentally knocked over an entire shelf of soup cans trying to reach for a box on the top shelf. The cans went everywhere, rolling across the floor in every direction, and Claire started laughing. Not a polite laugh, but a real, genuine laugh that made Marcus laugh too, even though he was embarrassed. That's how it started, with soup cans scattered across a church basement floor, and two people who couldn't stop smiling at each other. They talked for 3 hours that night, long after everyone else had gone home. Marcus told her about his job as an electrician, how he'd grown up in a small town in Ohio and moved to Michigan for work. Claire talked about her dreams of working in pediatric care, about how she loved the smell of old books and spent her weekends at estate sales looking for vintage medical textbooks. By the time they finally left that church basement, Marcus already knew he wanted to see her again. Their relationship progressed naturally over the following months. They had coffee dates that turned into dinner dates. They took long walks along the beach in the winter, bundled up against the cold. Marcus would surprise Claire with wildflowers he'd picked on his way to her apartment. Claire would leave little notes in Marcus's truck, things like "thinking of you" or "can't wait to see you tonight." Friends and family watched them fall in love, and everyone agreed they were perfect together. Claire's mother adored Marcus, said he had kind eyes and strong hands, the kind of man you could trust. Marcus's sister joked that she'd never seen her brother so happy, that Claire had brought out a side of him that was lighter, more open than he'd been in years. But there were small things, little moments that Claire noticed but didn't quite understand at the time. Sometimes Marcus would get a phone call, and his entire body would tense. He'd excuse himself and walk outside to take it, and when he came back, he'd be quiet for the rest of the evening. There were nights when Claire would wake up and find Marcus sitting by the window, just staring out into the darkness. And when she'd ask him what was wrong, he'd say he couldn't sleep, that it was nothing. Once they were at a restaurant, and a man walked in who looked vaguely familiar to Marcus, and he immediately suggested they leave, said he wasn't feeling well, even though they hadn't even gotten their food yet. Claire chalked it up to stress from work, maybe some anxiety he wasn't ready to talk about. She loved him, and she trusted that when he was ready, he would tell her what was weighing on his mind. What she didn't know, what Marcus hadn't told anyone in Michigan, was that his real name wasn't Marcus Bennett. His name was David Michael Porter, and 8 years earlier, he had witnessed something that changed his life forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My mom said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. In 2015, David Porter was working construction in Columbus, Ohio. He was 25 years old, ambitious, trying to save money to start his own electrical contracting business. One night in August, he was working late on a commercial building project in an industrial part of town. Most of the crew had gone home, but David stayed behind to finish running some wiring through a section of wall that needed to be closed up the next morning. It was around 11:30 at night when he heard voices coming from the loading dock area. At first, he thought maybe it was security making their rounds, but something about the tone made him pause. The voices were angry, urgent. David told investigators later that he should have just kept working, should have minded his own business, but curiosity got the better of him. He walked toward the loading dock area and peered around a stack of building materials. What he saw would haunt him for years. There were 3 men standing around the back of a cargo van. One of them David recognized immediately. His name was Vincent Caruso, a local businessman who owned several construction supply companies in the Columbus area. Caruso was well known, had his picture in the paper all the time, donated to local charities, sponsored youth sports teams. But that night, standing in that loading dock, Caruso wasn't playing the role of community benefactor. He was arguing with 2 other men, and even from a distance, David could see that one of them was holding a gun. David's first instinct was to back away slowly, to get out of there before anyone saw him. But then one of the men opened the back of the van, and David saw what was inside. There were dozens of boxes, and from what he could tell, they contained prescription medications, bottles, and bottles of pills. One of the men was saying something about a shipment being short, about money owed, and Caruso was getting more agitated, his voice rising. Then, in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, the man with the gun raised it and fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The third man, the one who had been arguing most loudly with Caruso, dropped to the ground. David froze. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Caruso looked down at the body on the ground, and even from where David was standing, he could see the cold, calculating expression on the man's face. There was no panic, no remorse. Caruso said something to the man with the gun, and they started dragging the body toward a different area of the loading dock. David finally found the ability to move. He backed away as quietly as he could, grabbed his tools, and got out of that building as fast as possible. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his truck keys into the ignition. He drove for 20 minutes before he pulled over on the side of the highway and threw up. He sat there for a long time, trying to process what he'd just seen, trying to figure out what to do. He knew he should call the police, but he also knew who Vincent Caruso was. The man had connections, had money, had influence. What if the police didn't believe him? What if Caruso found out that David had seen what happened? David went home that night and didn't sleep. He kept seeing that man fall, kept hearing the gunshot echoing in his head. The next morning, he called in sick to work. He spent the entire day pacing his apartment, going back and forth about what to do. Finally, that evening, he made a decision. He called the Columbus Police Department and asked to speak to someone in the detective division. He told them everything he'd seen. What followed was a whirlwind that David could never have prepared for. The detective he spoke to took his statement seriously, arranged for David to come in and give a full account of what he'd witnessed. Within days, the police had found the body of the man David had seen killed. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he had been reported missing by his family the morning after David witnessed his murder. The investigation moved quickly. Caruso was arrested, along with the man who had pulled the trigger, a guy named Kenneth Walsh, who worked as Caruso's head of security. The police discovered that Caruso had been running an illegal prescription drug operation for years, using his legitimate construction supply businesses as a cover. Brennan had been one of his distributors, and apparently there had been a dispute over money and territory. The prosecutor assigned to the case told David that his testimony would be crucial. Without David, they had circumstantial evidence, phone records, financial transactions that looked suspicious but nothing concrete. David's eyewitness account of the murder was what would make the case. But the prosecutor also told David something else. He told him that Caruso had ties to organized crime figures in Ohio and Pennsylvania, that the drug operation was much bigger than just one businessman, and that David's life was now in danger. That's when David learned about the Federal Witness Protection Program. The U.S. Marshal Service explained to him that if he agreed to testify, they could relocate him, give him a new identity, help him start over in a place where Caruso's people would never find him. It sounded like something from a movie, not something that happened to real people. But the alternative was living the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if every person who walked past him on the street was someone sent to silence him. David agreed to testify. The trial took place in early 2016, and David spent 3 days on the witness stand, recounting in detail what he had seen that night. He looked Vincent Caruso in the eye and described how Caruso had stood there calmly while Kenneth Walsh shot Thomas Brennan. The defense attorneys tried everything to discredit David, suggested he was mistaken, that it had been dark, that he couldn't possibly have seen what he claimed to see. But David held firm. His testimony, combined with the physical evidence and phone records, was enough. Caruso and Walsh were both convicted. Caruso received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Walsh got 40 years. David thought that would be the end of it, that he could move on with his life. But 2 weeks after the sentencing, the U.S. Marshals Service came to his apartment with urgent news. They had received credible intelligence that there was a contract out on David's life, that Caruso's associates on the outside had put up a significant amount of money for anyone who could find and kill the man who had testified against their boss. The marshals told David he needed to disappear, and he needed to do it immediately. Within 72 hours, David Porter ceased to exist. The marshals gave him a new name, Marcus Bennett, a new socials, security number, a new driver's license, a complete backstory. They relocated him to Grand Haven, Michigan, a place he'd never been before, a place where no one knew him or had any connection to his old life. They helped him find an apartment, helped him get his electrical contractor's license under his new name, helped him establish credit and a bank account. They told him that he could never contact his old friends or family, that he could never go back to Ohio, that for all intents and purposes, David Porter was dead. Marcus spent the first year in Grand Haven in a constant state of fear. Every time someone looked at him too long, every time a car followed too closely behind him on the road, every time his phone rang from an unknown number, his heart would race. But gradually, as months turned into years, Marcus started to believe that maybe he really had escaped, that maybe he really could have a normal life. And then he met Claire. And for the first time since that night in the loading dock, Marcus felt like he could breathe again. He fell in love with her, and it was the first real happiness he'd felt in years. But there was always that voice in the back of his mind, that knowledge that he was living a lie, that Claire didn't really know who he was. He told himself that it didn't matter, that Marcus Bennett was who he was now, that the past was behind him. They got engaged in April of 2023. Marcus proposed on the beach at sunset, got down on one knee in the sand while the waves crashed behind them. Claire said yes before he even finished asking the question. They started planning their wedding immediately, and Claire was so excited, so full of joy, that Marcus pushed down the anxiety that was starting to creep back into his thoughts. They set a date for June 14th, booked Riverside Gardens, a beautiful venue right on the water in Grand Haven. Claire handled most of the planning because Marcus's work schedule was busy, but he was involved in all the big decisions. They chose white roses for the flowers, a string quartet for the ceremony, a DJ for the reception. Claire found the perfect dress at a boutique in Holland, a vintage lace gown that she said made her feel like a princess. Marcus rented a classic tuxedo and tried on his best man's suggestions until he found one that fit perfectly. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But in late May, just a few weeks before the wedding, Marcus started receiving strange phone calls. They would come late at night after Claire had gone to sleep. The calls would ring once, maybe twice, and then stop. When Marcus tried to call the number back, it would be disconnected. At first, he told himself it was nothing, probably telemarketers or wrong numbers. But then the calls started coming during the day. Marcus would be at a job site, would pull out his phone, and see that same unknown number. He stopped answering his phone unless he recognized the number. Then, one afternoon, Marcus came home from work to find that someone had been in his and Claire's apartment. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, but things had been moved. A picture frame on the dresser was turned at a different angle. A kitchen cabinet that Marcus always kept closed was standing open. Claire hadn't noticed anything, said maybe Marcus was just misremembering, but Marcus knew. Someone had been there. Someone was sending him a message. That's when Marcus made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. He didn't tell Claire what was happening. He didn't call his U.S. Marshal contact to report the suspicious activity. He told himself that he was probably being paranoid, that it was just the stress of the wedding making him jumpy. He convinced himself that everything was fine, that he was safe, that his old life couldn't touch him here. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, Marcus knew better. He knew that something was wrong, that something was coming. The week before the wedding, Marcus barely slept. He would lie in bed next to Claire, listening to her breathe, and he would stare at the ceiling and wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Should he have told her the truth from the beginning? Should he tell her now? But how could he? How could he explain that everything she knew about him was a lie? That his name wasn't even real? That he had witnessed a murder and sent a dangerous man to prison? How could he ask her to marry someone who was living in witness protection, who would always be looking over his shoulder? Marcus decided that he would tell her after the wedding, after they were married and had come back from their honeymoon. He told himself that he would sit her down and explain everything, and that she would understand that their love was strong enough to survive the truth. It was a coward's decision, and on some level, Marcus knew that. But he was so close to having the life he'd always wanted, so close to putting the past behind him completely, that he couldn't bring himself to risk losing it. The wedding day arrived on a beautiful Saturday in June. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm, with a light breeze coming off the lake. Riverside Gardens looked like something out of a magazine, with white chairs lined up in perfect rows on the lawn, an arch covered in white roses and greenery where Marcus and Claire would exchange their vows, and strings of lights hanging from the trees that would glow once the sun went down. 200 guests filled the chairs, friends and family from Claire's side, people from Marcus's work, neighbors, colleagues. Marcus stood at the front with his best man, a guy named Jake, who he'd met through work and tried to calm his nerves. He kept scanning the crowd, looking at faces, trying to see if anyone seemed out of place. But everyone looked normal, happy, celebrating. He told himself to relax, that this was his wedding day, that he should be enjoying this moment. The music started, and the bridesmaids began walking down the aisle. Then Claire appeared at the back of the lawn with her father, and Marcus forgot everything else. She looked beautiful, absolutely radiant, in her grandmother's lace veil and the vintage dress she'd loved so much. Her father walked her down the aisle, and when they reached Marcus, her father shook his hand and placed Claire's hand in Marcus's. Claire was smiling so big, her eyes were shining with happy tears. The officiant began the ceremony, talking about love and commitment and the journey that Marcus and Claire were about to embark on together. Marcus said his vows, his voice only shaking slightly, and Claire said hers, and there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Then, just as the officiant was about to ask for the rings, Marcus felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He had meant to turn it off before the ceremony, but in his nervousness, he'd forgotten. He ignored it. His phone buzzed again, and again. Marcus could feel his heart starting to race. Who would be calling him during his wedding? The buzzing stopped for a moment, and Marcus tried to focus on what the officiant was saying. Then his phone started buzzing again, insistently, the kind of pattern that meant someone was calling repeatedly. Marcus glanced at Claire, and she was looking at him with a slightly concerned expression. "Is everything okay?" she whispered. Before Marcus could answer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a man standing at the very back of the seating area, partially obscured by one of the trees. The man was wearing a dark suit and sunglasses, and he was staring directly at Marcus. Marcus didn't recognize him, couldn't see his face clearly because of the sunglasses. But something about the way he was standing, the way he was watching, made every instinct in Marcus's body scream danger. Marcus looked away, tried to focus on Claire, on the ceremony, but his mind was racing. Who was that man? How had he gotten in? Was this what the phone calls had been about? The officiant was talking about the rings, and Marcus's best man was fishing them out of his pocket. Marcus forced himself to take the ring, to focus on what he was supposed to be doing. He was being paranoid, he told himself. It was probably just a friend of someone's family, someone who had shown up late. But then his phone started buzzing again, and this time Marcus couldn't ignore it anymore. He pulled it out of his pocket, and Claire looked at him in surprise. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she whispered. Marcus looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. All it said was, "Look behind you." Marcus turned around slowly. The man in the dark suit and sunglasses was closer now, standing at the edge of the seating area. And behind him, Marcus could see another man, also in a dark suit, standing near the entrance to the gardens. Marcus's mind went completely blank. Every fear he'd been pushing down for the past 3 years came flooding back all at once. They had found him. After all this time, all these precautions, they had found him. And they were here, at his wedding, with Claire and all these people around. Marcus didn't think. He just reacted. He grabbed Claire by the arm, harder than he meant to, and pulled her toward him. "We have to go," he said urgently. "Marcus, what are you talking about? We're in the middle of our wedding," Claire said, confused and starting to look frightened. "Claire, please, just trust me. We have to get out of here right now," Marcus said. He was looking around frantically, trying to figure out the best way to get Claire away from the crowd, away from those men. But Claire pulled her arm away from him. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on?" The guests were starting to murmur, sensing that something was wrong. Marcus's best man stepped forward. "Hey, man, are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" Marcus looked back at the man in the dark suit. The man was walking toward them now, walking down the center aisle between the chairs. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. Marcus could see the man reaching into his jacket. And that's when Marcus snapped. He didn't consciously decide to do it. It was pure instinct, pure panic. He turned back to Claire, and before he even realized what he was doing, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed across the lawn. There was a moment of absolute silence, where everyone just froze, unable to process what they'd just seen. Claire stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Then the chaos erupted. Women screamed, men started shouting. Someone yelled, "Call the police!" Marcus's best man grabbed him by the shoulders. "What the hell are you doing?" Claire was crying, her hand still on her face, looking at Marcus like she didn't recognize him. "I'm sorry. Marcus said desperately. "Claire, I'm so sorry. But they're here. They found us. We have to run. Now!" But before Claire could respond, before anyone could do anything, Marcus looked back and saw that the man in the dark suit had stopped walking. He was standing about 10 feet away, and he had pulled something out of his jacket. But it wasn't a gun. It was a badge. "Federal Agent Marcus Bennett / David Porter," the man said loudly, clearly, for everyone to hear. "U.S. Marshals Service. You need to come with us immediately." The entire wedding party stared in stunned silence. Claire looked from Marcus to the federal agent and back again, her expression a mixture of pain, confusion, and betrayal. "David?" she whispered. "Your name is David?" Another marshal appeared, this one a woman in a dark blazer, and she walked quickly toward Marcus and Claire. "Sir, we have a credible threat against your life. We need to evacuate you and your fiancée now. There's no time to explain." Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not now. "What threat? What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded. The female marshal looked at him with an expression that was both sympathetic and urgent. "Kenneth Walsh escaped from federal custody 3 days ago. We have intelligence that he's in Michigan, and we believe he's coming for you. We need to get you somewhere safe. Now." Kenneth Walsh, the man who had actually pulled the trigger that night in Columbus, the man who had murdered Thomas Brennan, was out of prison and looking for revenge. Marcus felt like the ground had opened up beneath him. "How did he escape? How did you let this happen?" Marcus asked, his voice rising. "Sir, we can discuss that later. Right now, we need to move. Both of you." The marshal gestured to Claire. Claire was still standing there, her hand on her cheek, where Marcus had hit her, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. "Who is David? Marcus, who are these people?" "Ma'am, your fiancé is in the Federal Witness Protection Program," the female marshal said gently but firmly. "His real name is David Porter, and he witnessed a murder 8 years ago. The man he testified against has associates who want him dead, and one of them is currently at large and believed to be in this area. We need to get both of you to a secure location immediately." The wedding guests were in complete pandemonium now. People were grabbing their children, running toward the parking lot, screaming and crying. Some of Claire's relatives were trying to push their way forward to get to her, demanding to know what was happening. The marshals had called for backup, and within minutes, 3 more federal vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Marcus looked at Claire, and the expression on her face broke his heart. She looked devastated, betrayed, and terrified all at once. "Claire, I can explain everything," Marcus said desperately. "I wanted to tell you. I was going to tell you. I'm so sorry." "You lied to me," Claire said quietly. Her voice was flat, emotionless, which was somehow worse than if she had been screaming at him. "About everything. Your name, your life, who you are. You lied about all of it." "I didn't have a choice. I was trying to protect you," Marcus said. "By hitting me?" Claire's voice broke. "In front of everyone? That's how you protect me?" "I thought they were going to hurt you," Marcus said, and he was crying now too. "I saw those men, and I thought they were here to kill us both, and I just panicked. I wasn't thinking. Claire, please, you have to believe me. I would never hurt you. I was trying to save you." The marshals were getting more insistent, trying to move Marcus and Claire toward one of the vehicles. "We really need to go. It's not safe here. the male marshal said. Claire looked at Marcus for a long moment, her eyes searching his face like she was seeing him for the first time, or maybe seeing him clearly for the first time. "I don't even know who you are," she said finally. Then she turned to the female marshal. "I'll go with you, but I want to go separately from him. I don't want to be in the same car." The marshal nodded. "We can arrange that. But ma'am, you need to understand. Your life may be in danger too now. These people don't care about collateral damage." Claire laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "My life was already in danger. I was about to marry a man who doesn't exist." The marshals split them up. Marcus was taken in one vehicle, Claire in another. As they were being driven away from the wedding venue, Marcus looked back and saw the chaos they were leaving behind. 200 people who had come to celebrate a wedding were instead running scared, being questioned by additional law enforcement who had arrived on scene. The white chairs were overturned, the roses scattered across the ground. The picture-perfect scene from just 30 minutes earlier was now a crime scene. Marcus put his head in his hands. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? How had his one moment of panic destroyed everything? Over the next several hours, Marcus and Claire were taken to a secure federal facility and debriefed separately. Marcus learned the full extent of what had happened. Kenneth Walsh had been transferred from a maximum security facility to a federal court for a hearing related to his appeal. During the transport, there had been an ambush. 2 corrections officers were killed, and Walsh had escaped with help from people on the outside. The FBI believed that Walsh had immediately gone looking for David Porter, seeking revenge for the testimony that had put him in prison. They had tracked Walsh's movements through phone records and surveillance footage, and everything pointed to him heading toward Michigan. The marshals had been trying to reach Marcus for 2 days, but he'd been so focused on the wedding that he'd ignored unknown numbers, hadn't checked his voicemail, hadn't responded to messages. By the time they realized they weren't getting through to him, Walsh was already in the state. The marshals made the decision to show up at the wedding in person because they had intelligence suggesting that Walsh might try to make a move during the ceremony, knowing that Marcus would be distracted and in public. The marshals explained that the slap, while shocking and completely inappropriate, had actually probably saved both Marcus and Claire's lives. The commotion it caused made the crowd scatter, which meant that if Walsh or his associates were anywhere in the vicinity, they would have been deterred from making a move. It's hard to target someone in the middle of a panicked crowd being swarmed by federal agents, but Marcus couldn't feel relieved. All he could think about was the look on Claire's face, the sound of his hand hitting her cheek, the betrayal in her eyes when she realized that everything about their relationship had been built on a lie. In the other room, Claire was being told that her entire life was about to change. The marshals explained that because she had been about to marry Marcus, because she had been at the center of a threat situation, she was now a potential target. Walsh might believe that she knew something, or that she could be used as leverage against Marcus. The only way to guarantee her safety was to either place her under protective custody temporarily, or to offer her entry into the witness protection program alongside Marcus. Claire sat in that sterile conference room, still wearing her wedding dress with the makeup smeared down her face from crying, and tried to process what she was being told. The man she loved didn't exist. His name was a lie. His history was a lie. He had witnessed a murder and testified against a dangerous criminal, and he had never told her. He had let her plan an entire wedding, let her believe they were building a life together, and all the while, he was keeping this massive, life-altering secret. And then he had hit her, in front of 200 people, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The marshals tried to explain that Marcus had been in a state of extreme panic, that he had believed he was protecting her, but Claire didn't want to hear it. "There's no excuse for hitting someone," she said quietly. "I don't care how scared he was. You don't put your hands on another person like that." The female marshal nodded. "You're right. There's no excuse. And if you want to press charges, that's absolutely your right. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. Will you work with us?" Claire nodded slowly. What choice did she have? Claire was taken to a safe house, a nondescript ranch home in a suburb outside of Detroit. Marcus was taken to a different location. They were kept separate for several days while the FBI and U.S. Marshals Service worked around the clock to locate Kenneth Walsh. During those days, Claire had a lot of time to think. She was angry, hurt, confused, devastated. But she was also, despite everything, worried about Marcus, or David, or whoever he really was. She kept replaying their entire relationship in her mind, trying to figure out what had been real and what had been performance. Did he really love her, or was she just part of his cover? When he said he wanted to spend his life with her, did he mean it, or was he just going through the motions of creating a normal life? The questions ate at her. On the fourth day, the marshals came to Claire with news. They had found Kenneth Walsh. There had been a standoff at a motel near Muskegon, about 40 minutes from Grand Haven. Walsh had been holed up there with 2 associates, and when federal agents moved in to arrest him, Walsh had opened fire. The resulting shootout lasted less than 5 minutes. Walsh was killed. His 2 associates surrendered and were taken into custody. It was over. Marcus was safe. Claire was safe. But Claire didn't feel safe. She felt like her entire world had been torn apart. The marshals told her that she could go home if she wanted, that the immediate threat was neutralized. Although they recommended she stay in protective custody for at least a few more weeks, while they made sure there were no other associates of Walsh or Caruso who might try to come after her or Marcus. They also told her that Marcus was asking to see her, that he had been asking every day since they'd been separated. Claire didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to see him, wanted to hear him explain, wanted to understand. But another part of her wasn't sure she could ever look at him the same way again. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect on Claire's situation. If you were in her position, if someone you loved had kept such a massive secret from you, would you be able to forgive them? Could you understand why they did it? Or would the betrayal be too great? Let us know in the comments what you would do if you found yourself in Claire's shoes. After 5 days of agonizing deliberation, Claire agreed to meet with Marcus. They arranged it at the safe house where Claire had been staying, with marshals present in the building but giving them privacy in the living room. Marcus looked terrible when he walked in. He had dark circles under his eyes, his hair was a mess, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Claire, his face crumpled. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." Claire sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She had changed out of her wedding dress, was now wearing jeans and a sweater that one of the female marshals had brought her. She looked at Marcus, this man she had thought she knew so well, and felt like she was looking at a stranger. "I don't even know what to call you," she said quietly. "Are you Marcus or David?" "Both," Marcus said desperately. "I mean, David is the name I was born with, but Marcus is who I've been for the last 8 years. That's who I was when I met you. That's who I am now." "But it's not your real name," Claire said. "It's a lie. Everything about you is a lie." "No," Marcus said firmly. "My name might not be real, but everything else was real. My feelings for you, our relationship, the life we were building together, all of that was real. I love you, Claire. That's the most real thing in my life." Claire felt tears starting to fall again. She had cried so much over the past 5 days that she was surprised she had any tears left. "If you loved me, how could you keep something like this from me? How could you let me plan a wedding, pick out a dress, send out invitations, and never tell me the truth about who you were, what your life was really like?" "I wanted to tell you," Marcus said. He sat down in the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "So many times, I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I was scared that if you knew the truth, you would leave. I was scared that you would see me differently, that you would realize that being with me means always looking over your shoulder, always wondering if someone from my past is going to show up. I was selfish. I wanted a normal life so badly that I convinced myself I could have it without dragging you into all of this." "But you did drag me into it," Claire said, her voice rising slightly. "You didn't give me a choice. You made that decision for me. Don't you see how wrong that was?" "Yes," Marcus said immediately. "Yes, I see that now. I was wrong. I should have told you from the beginning, or at the very least, I should have told you before I proposed. You deserved to know what you were getting into. You deserved the chance to make an informed decision about whether you wanted to be with me. And I took that choice away from you because I was too much of a coward to risk losing you." Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And then you hit me," she said quietly, "in front of everyone." Marcus's face went pale. "Claire, I will regret that for the rest of my life. I know there's no excuse. I know that what I did was wrong on every level. I was in a complete state of panic. I saw those men, and I thought they were there to kill us both, and my brain just short-circuited. I grabbed you, and all I could think was that I needed to make you understand how serious it was, that we needed to run. But even with all of that, I never should have put my hands on you like that. I understand if you can never forgive me for that." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at Marcus and said, "Tell me about David Porter. Tell me about what happened that night in Columbus. Tell me everything from the beginning. No more secrets." So Marcus did. He told her everything. About working late that night, about hearing voices and going to investigate, about seeing Vincent Caruso and Kenneth Walsh and the murder of Thomas Brennan, about going to the police, about testifying at the trial, about the threats and the decision to enter witness protection. He told her about the first year in Grand Haven, how lonely and scared he had been, how he had jumped at every shadow. He told her about meeting her at the food bank, about how she had made him laugh for the first time in so long, about how falling in love with her had made him feel human again. He told her about the phone calls in the weeks leading up to the wedding, about the feeling that someone had been in their apartment, about how he had convinced himself that he was just being paranoid. He told her about the moment he saw the marshals at the wedding, about how his mind had gone completely blank with fear. Claire listened to all of it without interrupting. When Marcus finally finished, it was dark outside. They had been talking for hours. "I need time," Claire said finally. "I need time to process all of this, to figure out what I want. I can't just forgive you and pretend like everything is fine. You hurt me. You lied to me. You violated my trust in the worst possible way. But I also understand now why you did what you did. And I understand that you were trying to protect me, even if you went about it in completely the wrong way." Marcus nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll wait." Claire stood up to leave, and Marcus stood too. "Claire," he said, "I just want you to know that whether you decide to stay with me or not, I will do everything in my power to make sure you're safe. That's my responsibility. I brought this into your life, and I will protect you from it." Claire looked at him, and for the first time since the wedding, she saw a hint of the man she had fallen in love with. "I know you will," she said softly. Then she left. The marshals told Claire that she could return to her apartment, that they would have agents keeping an eye on her place for the next several weeks just to be safe, but that the immediate danger was over. Claire went back to her apartment and stood in the doorway, looking at all the boxes of wedding gifts that had been delivered, the dress hanging in the closet, the calendar on the fridge with "Wedding Day" written in big letters on June 14th. She broke down crying again. Over the next 2 months, Claire went through something that can only be described as grief. She was mourning the life she thought she was going to have, the man she thought she knew, the future that had been so carefully planned out. She went back to work at the hospital, and her co-workers tiptoed around her, unsure of what to say. The wedding fiasco had been all over the local news. There were video clips from guests' phones showing the slap, showing the chaos, showing the federal agents. Claire's picture was in the news stories, and she felt like everywhere she went, people were staring at her, pitying her, judging her. She started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and betrayal. The therapist helped her work through her feelings, helped her separate her anger at Marcus from her anger at the situation they were in. The therapist also pointed out something that Claire hadn't fully processed. She said, "Claire, you need to understand that you're grieving multiple losses. You're grieving the loss of Marcus, as you knew him. You're grieving the loss of your wedding day and what that represented. You're grieving the loss of your sense of safety and normalcy. But you also need to ask yourself, are you grieving the loss of Marcus himself? Do you still love him underneath all the hurt and anger?" Claire didn't have an answer to that question at first. But as the weeks went by, she found herself thinking about Marcus constantly. She would remember little moments from their relationship, things that at the time had seemed insignificant, but now took on new meaning. She remembered how Marcus had always insisted on walking her to her car at night, how he would check the locks on her apartment windows, how he would sometimes wake up from nightmares and refuse to talk about them. She had thought he was just protective, maybe a little anxious. Now she understood that he had been living with constant fear, and he had been doing everything in his power to keep her safe from a threat she didn't even know existed. She also thought about the slap, about that moment of violence that had overshadowed everything else. And while she still felt the sting of betrayal and hurt, she started to understand that Marcus had not hit her out of anger or a desire to control her. He had hit her in a moment of blind panic, genuinely believing that she was in mortal danger. It didn't make it right, didn't excuse it, but it gave context. And Claire needed that context to be able to move forward. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Claire reached out to Marcus. She sent him a text message. It said simply, "Can we talk?" Marcus responded within seconds. "Anytime, anywhere." They met at a coffee shop in a town halfway between where Marcus was now living and where Claire was. Marcus had been relocated again after the Walsh situation, given a new address for additional security. When Claire walked into the coffee shop and saw Marcus sitting at a corner table, her heart did a little flip. He looked better than he had the last time she'd seen him. Still tired, still carrying the weight of everything that had happened, but more like himself. They ordered coffee and sat down, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "I'm sure you have," Marcus said quietly. "And I've realized something," Claire continued. "I realized that I am angry at you for lying to me, for not trusting me with the truth. But I'm not angry at you for being in witness protection. That wasn't your choice. You did a brave thing testifying against those men. You helped put a murderer in prison. And the cost of that bravery was that you had to give up your entire life. Your family, your friends, your identity. That's not a small thing." Marcus nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And then meeting you, falling in love with you, that was like being given a second chance at life. But I handled it all wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth." "Yes, you should have," Claire agreed. "But I also understand why you didn't. You were scared. You were trying to protect me from something that you thought would put me in danger or drive me away. I don't agree with the choice you made, but I understand it." There was a pause, and then Claire took a deep breath and said, "I also need to tell you something. That night at the safe house, when I said I needed time to think, I wasn't just thinking about whether I could forgive you. I was thinking about whether I could handle this life. Because if I choose to be with you, I'm choosing a life where I always have to be careful, where I can't fully trust that we're safe, where the past could come back at any moment. That's a huge thing to take on." "It is," Marcus said, "and I would completely understand if you decided that it's too much. You didn't ask for any of this. You deserve a normal, safe life with someone who doesn't come with all this baggage." Claire smiled sadly. "The thing is, Marcus, life doesn't come with guarantees anyway. I work in a hospital. I see people every single day whose lives are turned upside down by things they never saw coming. Illness, accidents, tragedies. Nobody really gets a guarantee of safety or normalcy. So, maybe the question isn't whether I can handle a life with uncertainty. Maybe the question is whether I love you enough to handle this particular uncertainty." Marcus reached across the table and gently took Claire's hand. She didn't pull away. "Do you?" he asked softly. "Do you still love me?" Claire looked at their hands, his fingers intertwined with hers. "I do," she said. "I'm still hurt, and I'm still angry sometimes. and I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened at that wedding. But I love you, I love David, and I love Marcus, because I think they're the same person, just different chapters of the same story." Marcus let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. "Claire, if you're willing to give me another chance, I promise you that I will never lie to you again. I will never keep anything from you. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this up to you and trying to be worthy of your trust." Claire squeezed his hand. "I need to take this slowly. I'm not ready to just jump back into where we were before. We need to rebuild this from the ground up. And part of that means you need to help me understand your world, the reality of what it means to be with someone in witness protection. No more secrets, no more protection, by keeping me in the dark. If we're going to do this, we do it together, with full honesty." "I can do that," Marcus said. "I will do that. Whatever you need." They sat there for a long time, just talking. Marcus told her more details about his life before witness protection, about his family that he hadn't spoken to in 8 years, about the person he used to be. Claire told him about the pain of the past few months, about the therapy she'd been going through, about the process of rebuilding her sense of self after everything had been shattered. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments where they both cried, but it was honest and it was real. For the first time since that terrible day at Riverside Gardens, Claire felt like she was actually talking to the real person behind the name, whoever that person was. Over the following months, Claire and Marcus rebuilt their relationship slowly and carefully. They went on dates, but they were different from before. Now they talked about the hard things, about Marcus's past and the ongoing reality of his situation. Marcus introduced Claire to his U.S. Marshal contact so she could understand the protocols and safety measures that were in place. Claire set clear boundaries. She told Marcus that if he ever felt like they were in danger, he needed to tell her immediately, not try to handle it on his own. She also made him agree to attend counseling with her, both individually and as a couple, to work through the trauma of what had happened. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks. There were days when Claire would look at Marcus and remember the feeling of his hand across her face, and she would feel a surge of anger and hurt. There were nights when Marcus would wake up from nightmares about Kenneth Walsh, or Vincent Caruso, or the night he witnessed the murder. But they worked through it together. They learned how to communicate better, how to trust each other with the hard truths, how to support each other through the ongoing process of healing. A year later, on a quiet evening in September, Marcus and Claire were sitting on the porch of the small house they had bought together in a different Michigan town. They had decided not to stay in Grand Haven. Felt like too many painful memories were attached to that place. Their new house was modest but cozy, with a big backyard and a view of the woods. They were watching the sunset, drinking tea, and just enjoying the peaceful moment. "Claire," Marcus said suddenly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Claire asked. "I want to marry you," Marcus said. "I know that the first time was a disaster, and I know that you might not be ready, but I still want to spend my life with you. I want us to have the wedding we should have had, the life we should be living." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to him with a gentle smile. "I want that too," she said. "But not yet. I think we need more time. We need to keep building this foundation we've created, make sure it's really solid before we take that next step. Does that make sense?" Marcus nodded. "It makes perfect sense. I can wait. I'd wait forever for you if I had to." "You won't have to wait forever," Claire assured him. "Just a little while longer." 2 years after the wedding that ended in chaos, Marcus and Claire finally got married. It was a small ceremony, just 20 people, Claire's closest family, and a few friends who had stood by them through everything. They got married in the backyard of their house, under the trees, with a simple arch decorated with wildflowers. Marcus wore a simple suit. Claire wore a tea-length dress. And when they exchanged vows, both of them cried. There was no dramatic entrance by federal marshals, no shocking revelations, no violence. Just two people who had been through hell and had chosen to love each other anyway, promising to face whatever came next together. When the officiant pronounced them married and Marcus kissed Claire, their small group of guests erupted in applause and cheers. After the ceremony, they had a simple dinner reception on the back porch. Claire's mother gave a toast, talking about resilience and love and second chances. Marcus's best man, Jake, who had been there for the first wedding and had stayed loyal through all the chaos, gave a toast about friendship and standing by people even when things get complicated. And then Marcus stood up to say a few words. "I know that our story is not a typical love story," he said, looking at Claire. "We've been through things that most couples never have to face. We've had to rebuild trust from the ground up. We've had to learn how to be honest with each other, even when that honesty is painful. And I know that our future might not be simple or easy, but I also know that there is no one else in the world I would rather face that future with than Claire. She is the strongest, most forgiving, most incredible person I have ever known, and I spend every day trying to be worthy of her love." Claire stood up and wrapped her arms around Marcus, and he held her close. As the evening wore on and their small group of guests mingled and laughed and celebrated, Claire pulled Marcus aside for a moment. "Are you happy?" she asked him. Marcus looked around at the simple decorations, the people who loved them, the woman standing in front of him, who had given him a second chance he knew he didn't deserve. "I'm happier than I ever thought I could be," he said honestly. "Even with everything we've been through?" "Especially because of everything we've been through," Marcus said. "It made us stronger. It made us real." Claire smiled and kissed him softly. "I love you, David Michael Marcus Porter Bennett, or whoever you are." "I love you too," Marcus said, "and I promise you, for the rest of our lives, I will never give you a reason to doubt that." They stood there together as the sun set behind the trees, holding each other, knowing that their journey hadn't been easy and wouldn't always be easy going forward, but they also knew that they had something rare and precious. They had fought for their love, and they had earned it, and that made it worth everything. This is the story of Marcus and Claire, of a wedding that ended in violence and betrayal, and a love that somehow survived it all. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, that forgiveness is possible even after the deepest hurts, and that true love isn't about perfection or fairy tales. It's about choosing each other over and over again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So I want to ask you, watching this story unfold, what would you have done in Claire's position? Could you have forgiven someone who lied to you about their entire identity? Could you have understood the desperation that led to that moment of violence? And what about Marcus? Do you think he was justified in keeping his past a secret to protect Claire? Or should he have told her the truth from the beginning? These are not easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But they're worth thinking about because they touch in something fundamental about human relationships. How much truth do we owe the people we love? And how much can love endure? Thank you for watching this story with us. If this video moved you in any way, if it made you think about trust and forgiveness and the complexity of love, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. My mom said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss our upcoming stories. We'll see you in the next one.